He tried to humiliate her in front of $100 million worth of ego, then her first note made the world stop. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'll be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now back to our story. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Royale Hotel wasn't just a room, it was a statement. A sea of shimmering gold and deep mahogany, it was designed to make money feel like old art. Light from 3 colossal chandeliers, each a constellation of hand-cut crystal, scattered across the tables like liquid gold, catching on the rims of champagne flutes and the diamonds encircling the throats of women whose laughter was as light and expensive as the perfume they wore. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, seared scallops, and the subtle metallic tang of influence. Conversations hummed, a low, confident murmur about stock markets, summer homes in the Hamptons, and the delightful trivialities of the fabulously wealthy. This was the wedding reception of the year, a merger of 2 of the city's most powerful families, and the room pulsed with a self-assured energy that tolerated no intrusion from the outside world. On the periphery of this glittering universe, another world existed in the shadows. Here, staff in starched uniforms moved with practiced invisibility, their footsteps silent on the plush carpet. They were ghosts at the feast, their purpose to anticipate every need before it was spoken, to ensure that the delicate ecosystem of the elite was never disturbed. Among them was Amara Johnson. In her crisp maroon and white uniform, her name tag a small impersonal plastic rectangle on her vest, Amara navigated the labyrinth of tables with a server's tray balanced expertly on one hand. She had worked at the Royale for 2 years, long enough to learn the cardinal rule of her profession, to be present but unseen. Her face was a mask of polite neutrality, her movements efficient and silent. She refilled a water glass here, removed a finished plate there, her eyes focused on her tasks, deliberately avoiding the gazes of the guests. To them, she was not a person but a function, a pair of hands that appeared and disappeared as needed. And for the most part, Amara preferred it that way. Invisibility was a form of armor. It protected the part of her that dreamed of a different life, a life where her voice mattered more than her service. Tonight, the armor felt thin. The sheer opulence of the event felt more suffocating than usual. As she moved, she caught snippets of conversation that felt like they were from another planet. A woman in a sapphire dress complained about the difficulty of finding a good yacht crew. A man with a booming laugh joked about misplacing a 6-figure watch. Amara focused on the weight of the plates, the heat radiating from the silver covers, anything to ground herself in her reality. Her sister's tuition was due next month, and this job, with its grueling hours and occasional tips from a sympathetic guest, was the only thing standing between her family and a mountain of debt. That thought was her shield, her reason for enduring the polite condescension and the feeling of being a ghost. Near the head table, seated in a throne of self-importance, was Liam Ward. He was the groom's best friend, but he carried himself like the main event. Tall, with a smile that was more a display of teeth than a sign of warmth, Liam was the heir to a real estate empire that had plastered his family's name on half the city's skyscrapers. He had been born on third base and was convinced he'd hit a triple. Wealth hadn't just given him opportunity. It had given him a profound arrogance, a belief that the world was his personal stage and everyone else was merely an actor, or worse, a prop. He was holding court, his voice louder than those around him, his laughter a sharp, barking sound that demanded attention. His friends, a collection of young men in impeccably tailored suits, leaned in, their own laughter a chorus of sycophantic approval. "And then he tells me he's following his passion," Liam was saying, his words dripping with contempt. He took a long sip of champagne. His passion for what? Living in his parents' basement? I told him, passion doesn't pay the bills. Some people just dream too big for their station. They need to learn their place. The groom, a quieter man named Alex, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Come on, Liam. He's just trying to start a business." "A business selling artisanal dog treats online," Liam scoffed, and his friends erupted in laughter again. "It's a joke. He should be taking the junior partnership his father offered him. But no, he wants to be an entrepreneur. It's embarrassing." Amara was clearing a nearby table, her back to them, but his words landed like stones. Learn their place. Dream too big for their station. The phrases were familiar, echoes of 1,000 subtle insults she had absorbed over the years. She stacked the porcelain plates carefully, the clinking sound a quiet counterpoint to Liam's derisive tone. To calm the knot of anger and anxiety tightening in her stomach, she began to hum. It was a subconscious act, a habit ingrained since childhood. The melody was an old gospel tune her mother used to sing in the church choir, a song about finding grace in moments of trial. The tune was soft, barely a whisper of air leaving her lips, a private comfort in a public space. It was a piece of home, a shield for her soul when the armor of her uniform wasn't enough. For a moment, the weight of the room lifted, and she was a little girl again, sitting in a wooden pew, watching her mother's face light up as her voice soared to the heavens. She was so lost in the memory that she didn't notice the conversation at Liam's table had died down. She didn't feel his eyes on her until the silence became a tangible presence. Liam leaned forward, his smirk widening. He had heard it, the faint, pure melody cutting through the noise. He saw not a person seeking solace, but an opportunity for a new kind of entertainment. He raised his hand, silencing one of his friends who was about to speak. Amara finished stacking the plates and turned, her professional smile already forming on her lips. But it froze when she saw that every face at the high table was turned towards her. Liam's eyes, cold and amused, were locked on hers. "You've got a voice, huh?" he said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet. Amara's heart stopped. She felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She said nothing, her mind scrambling, her training screaming at her to apologize and disappear. But Liam wasn't finished. He stood up, tapping his champagne flute with a knife to get the attention of the surrounding tables. The gentle murmur of the ballroom began to quiet down as heads turned in their direction. The bride's smile faltered. "Why don't you sing for us, sweetheart?" Liam announced, his voice booming with theatrical generosity. He gestured to her with a sweeping motion of his arm, as if presenting a rare curiosity. "Let's see if the help can entertain the high table." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering with malice. A few of Liam's friends let out snickering laughs. Other guests exchanged uncertain glances, a mix of shock and morbid curiosity on their faces. The band, which had been playing a soft jazz melody, trailed off into awkward silence. The entire cavernous ballroom, with its hundreds of guests, was now utterly still. For Amara, the world narrowed to a single, agonizing point. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes felt like a physical force, pinning her to the spot. Her training, her composure, her carefully constructed invisibility, it all evaporated in an instant. She was exposed, a specimen under a microscope. The tray in her hand, once a simple tool of her trade, now felt like an anchor, pulling her down into a sea of humiliation. Her throat was tight, her lips dry. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears, drowning out the last echoes of the gospel tune. All she could hear now was his mocking challenge, replaying in her mind. "Sweetheart." The help. He had stripped her of her name, her identity, reducing her to a function, a joke. She looked past him and saw the bride, her face pale with distress, whispering something to the groom. She saw Liam's father, a grim-faced man in a tailored suit, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. He made no move to intervene. This was his son's show. Amara's gaze finally landed back on Liam. He was beaming, his arms crossed, relishing the power he wielded. He had created this moment, this perfect little drama of class and cruelty, and he was waiting for its inevitable conclusion, her stammered apology, her tearful retreat to the kitchens, a story he could laugh about for weeks to come. She opened her mouth to speak, to say anything that would make it stop, but no words came out. The air was too thick to breathe. All she could do was stand there, frozen in the golden light of the chandeliers, her name tag glinting on her chest, a silent testament to the person they refused to see. The humiliation was a physical ache, a fire burning behind her eyes. She fought back the tears, her hands trembling, the weight of Liam's challenge echoing across the deafening silence of the ballroom. Of course. Here is the full text of Act 2, continuing directly from the end of Act 1 and following your detailed outline and word count requirements. The silence in the ballroom stretched for an eternity. For Amara, it was a suffocating void where the only sound was the frantic drumming of her own heart. She stood pinned by 100 stairs, a butterfly trapped in a jar, her wings beating against invisible walls. Liam's smirk was a mask of triumph, a silent declaration of his victory. He had broken her, and the entire world was his witness. It was the groom, Alex, who finally broke the spell. He placed a firm hand on Liam's shoulder, his voice low but cutting. "That's enough, Liam. Leave her alone." The words were not an apology, but a command to cease the entertainment. The tension fractured, and a low murmur rippled through the crowd as guests, sensing the drama was over, turned back to their conversations. The moment had passed. The ghost was free to disappear again. Amara didn't need a second invitation. With her head down, her face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a fever, she turned and walked away. She didn't run. Her steps were measured, a retreat of forced composure, but every inch of her being screamed to flee. She could feel Liam's eyes on her back, could almost hear his silent, mocking laughter. She pushed through the double doors leading to the service corridor, and the sudden, sterile quiet of the hallway was a gasp of air after being held underwater. She didn't stop until she reached the chaotic sanctuary of the main kitchen. Here, the air was thick with the smells of garlic, hot metal, and dish soap. The clatter of pots and the hiss of the industrial dishwasher were a welcome cacophony, a wall of sound that drowned out the echoes of the ballroom. A few of her fellow servers were gathered by the coffee station, their hushed conversation stopping the moment she entered. They looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination, then quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be busy. The incident had already become kitchen gossip. Her supervisor, a tired woman named Maria with lines of perpetual stress etched around her eyes, intercepted her by the dish pit. "Johnson," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. "What was that?" Amara couldn't find the words. She just shook her head, staring at the grime-caked floor tiles. Maria sighed, her expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening again. "I don't care what happened out there," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But you need to understand something. People like him, people with that kind of money and that kind of name, they don't play by our rules. They own the game. You can't talk back. You can't make a scene. You just keep your head down and do your job. They can ruin you, Amara. One phone call. That's all it takes. Are we clear?" "Yes, Maria," Amara mumbled, the words tasting like ash. "Ruin her." The threat was not an exaggeration. It was a simple statement of fact. Her sister's future, her family's stability, it was all balanced on the whims of men like Liam Ward. She retreated to a small, cluttered break area in the back, sinking onto a wobbly stool. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to contain the trembling that had started in her hands and was now spreading through her entire body. The humiliation was a cold, heavy thing, settling deep in her bones. "Your voice is a gift from God, Amara Grace," her mother's voice echoed in her memory, warm and rich like velvet. "It's not just for you. It's for lifting spirits. It's for sharing the light." The memory was vivid, painted in the sun-drenched colors of a Sunday morning. She was 10 years old, standing on a wooden stool in their small kitchen, helping her mother knead dough for supper rolls. Her mother, Sarah, was humming that same gospel tune, her hands dusted with flour. Their home was modest, a small house with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked, but it was filled with a light that had nothing to do with money. It was filled with music. Sarah was the lead soprano in the church choir, and her voice was a local legend. It could shake the rafters and soothe a crying baby in the very next breath. She taught Amara to sing, not with formal lessons, but with the casual grace of a bird teaching its young to fly. They sang while they cooked, while they cleaned, while they tended to the small garden in their backyard. Music was the language of their love, the texture of their joy. "Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small for what you've been given," Sarah would tell her, cupping her face in her warm hands. "Your dignity is your own. You carry it inside you right here." She would tap Amara's chest gently. "No one can take it unless you let them." A quiet cough brought Amara back to the harsh fluorescent light of the break room. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, her silver hair styled in an elegant chignon. She wore a simple but expensive-looking silk dress, and her eyes, magnified by her glasses, were kind and perceptive. Amara recognized her from a table near the back of the ballroom. "I'm sorry to intrude, my dear," the woman said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm Vivian Ellis. I was sitting nearby, and I couldn't help but overhear that dreadful young man." Amara stood up quickly, her server's training kicking in. "Ma'am, I'm sorry if there was a disturbance." Mrs. Ellis waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. The only disturbance was his appalling lack of manners. I came to find you because I heard you humming earlier." Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "And I wanted to tell you something. Don't let anyone silence your voice. God doesn't give gifts for you to hide them under a bushel." The words were so close to her mother's that they sent a shiver down Amara's spine. For a moment, she was speechless. She saw a flicker of the same fierce protective light in Mrs. Ellis's eyes that she remembered in her mother's. But the moment was fleeting, crushed by the weight of her reality. "Thank you, ma'am," Amara said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'm just a waitress." The phrase hung in the air between them, a shield, a surrender, a cage. Mrs. Ellis held her gaze for a long moment, a sad, knowing smile touching her lips. She seemed to understand everything Amara wasn't saying, the fear, the responsibility, the dreams that had been packed away like old clothes. Without another word, she nodded and turned, disappearing back down the corridor, leaving Amara alone with the ghosts of who she used to be. The music had stopped 3 years ago. It died on a cold Tuesday in November, the same day her mother's heart gave out. The silence that filled their small house in the days after the funeral was deafening. It was a silence made of hospital bills, mortgage payments, and the terrifying reality of being the sole guardian to her younger sister Maya, who was just starting high school with dreams of becoming a doctor. Amara was 19, a freshman music major at the local community college with a scholarship and a voice that her professors said was 1 in a million. But scholarships didn't pay for groceries. They didn't keep the lights on. They didn't pave the way for a younger sister's future. So, she packed away her sheet music. She dropped out of her classes. She sold her mother's old piano to cover the funeral costs. She abandoned her dream, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet, gut-wrenching finality of a door clicking shut on the only life she had ever wanted. She took 2 jobs, the hotel by night and a diner by day, becoming a ghost in both. The dream was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her voice, the gift her mother had cherished, became a secret she kept locked away, a painful reminder of a future that had been stolen from her. And now, a spoiled millionaire had tried to turn that secret into a party trick. Hours later, the wedding reception was over. The last of the guests had departed in a fleet of black cars, leaving behind a ballroom that looked like the aftermath of a beautiful storm. Amara was part of the cleanup crew, her movements slow and heavy with exhaustion. She cleared half-empty glasses, picked up discarded napkins, and wiped down sticky tables, the ghost returning to her duties. The room was quiet now, save for the hum of the vacuum cleaner in the far corner. As she worked, she found herself humming again. The same gospel tune. It started as a faint tremor, a note of defiance against the crushing weight of the night. Her voice was trembling, fragile, but it was there. It was hers. It grew a little stronger, the melody filling the empty space around her, pure and clear, a quiet prayer in the gilded cage. Across the room, a bored wedding videographer was packing his equipment. He had been filming for 10 hours and was running on fumes and stale coffee. He swung his camera around, intending to capture a few final sweeping shots of the empty ballroom for B-roll. The lens drifted across the vacant dance floor, over the wilting floral centerpieces, and settled for just a few seconds on the lone figure of a waitress clearing a table by the window. He zoomed in slightly, capturing the melancholic beauty of the scene. He couldn't hear the song clearly through the cavernous space, but he could see her singing, her eyes closed, her expression a mixture of sorrow and strength. He recorded for about 15 seconds before his battery finally died. He sighed, packed the camera away, and didn't give the footage another thought. Meanwhile, in a penthouse suite upstairs, Liam Ward was celebrating with a groom and a few close friends. The incident with the waitress was already a distant, amusing anecdote. "You should have seen her face," Liam said, laughing as he poured another round of whiskey. "I thought she was going to burst into tears right there." Classic. His friends laughed with him, their faces flushed with expensive liquor. The cruelty of the moment had been repackaged as a good story, a minor footnote in a night of excess. Liam raised his glass, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips, completely unaware that his casual act of malice had not crushed a spirit, but awakened a quiet storm. He had no idea that a few seconds of forgotten footage on a dead camera battery held the power to undo him. Of course. Here is the full text of Act 3, continuing the narrative from where Act 2 concluded. It adheres to your detailed outline, word count, and established tone. 2 nights later, the grand ballroom of the Riverside Royale was transformed once again. The remnants of the wedding, the white roses and soft, romantic lighting, had been replaced by a more energetic, vibrant atmosphere. It was a post-wedding celebration, a final, lavish thank you for the out-of-town guests before they scattered back to their own corners of the world. The jazz band played a faster tempo, the laughter was a little louder, and the clinking of glasses was more frequent. It was a party determined to burn brightly before it extinguished. For Amara, it was just another shift. She had spent the last 48 hours trying to scrub the memory of Liam Ward's voice from her mind. She had worked a double at the diner, helped Maya with her calculus homework, and paid the electric bill online, immersing herself in the mundane rhythm of her life. She had tried to convince herself that the incident was a small, insignificant tear in the fabric of her existence, something that could be patched over and forgotten. She had requested to work the service corridors for the night, hoping to avoid the main floor, but a last-minute staffing shortage had forced her back into the ballroom, back into the lion's den. Tonight, her armor of invisibility felt heavier, more brittle. Every time she entered the main room, her eyes instinctively scanned for him, her muscles tensing in anticipation. She moved with an extra layer of caution, keeping to the edges of the room, her gaze fixed on the floor, on the table numbers, on anything but the faces of the guests. 4 hours, her strategy worked. The party swirled around her, a storm she successfully navigated without being drawn into its center. But storms have a way of finding you. Liam Ward was not having a good night. At the wedding, he had been the best man, a position of honor that afforded him a natural spotlight. Tonight, however, the attention had shifted. The bride and groom were the undisputed center of gravity, and Liam found himself relegated to the role of a mere guest. He was restless, slightly drunk on expensive scotch, and growing increasingly irritated by his own perceived irrelevance. He thrived on being seen, on being the one to command a room, and the quiet adulation being showered on the happy couple was a spotlight he wasn't sharing. He needed a moment, a spark, something to remind everyone who he was. His gaze swept across the room, bored and restless, and then it landed on a familiar figure in a maroon and white uniform. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. There she was. The waitress. The songbird. His little piece of entertainment from the other night. The perfect prop for the performance he was about to give. He waited until she was clearing a table near the center of the room, then pushed himself to his feet. He moved with the unearned confidence of a man who had never been told no, weaving through the tables until he was standing directly behind her. Amara felt a presence before she heard him. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a primal warning system screaming at her to turn and run. But she was frozen, the empty wine glass in her hand suddenly feeling as heavy as lead. Well, well. Still here, songbird. Liam's voice was a low drawl, thick with scotch and condescension, yet loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. I thought I gave you your big break the other night. I expected to see you on a stage by now, not clearing glasses. A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the nearby guests. It was different from the other night, less openly mocking, more awkward. They were spectators to a scene they weren't sure they were supposed to enjoy. Amara squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second, a silent prayer for the floor to swallow her whole. She could feel the heat of a dozen stares on her, the familiar agonizing weight of public humiliation settling over her once more. She refused to turn, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her face. She was about to murmur an apology and walk away when another voice cut through the tension, a voice that was calm, clear, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority. And I thought a man of your supposed stature would have better manners. Every head turned. Standing at a table a few feet away was Mrs. Vivian Ellis. She had risen from her seat, her posture erect, her gaze fixed on Liam with a look of profound disappointment. The room, which had been buzzing with conversation, began to quiet down, a new, more intriguing drama capturing its attention. Liam was momentarily taken aback, his smirk faltering. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by an elderly woman he didn't recognize. I'm sorry, he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. Do I know you? You do not, Mrs. Ellis replied evenly. But I know your type. You build yourselves up by tearing others down. It's a sad and remarkably common form of architecture. She took a step forward, her voice gaining strength. You seem so determined to prove this young woman has no talent. It makes one wonder what you're afraid of. If you're so sure she can't sing, why don't you let her prove it? The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown. A murmur of excitement went through the crowd. This was better than polite conversation and bland canapes. This was a real-life spectacle. Cries of "let her sing," and "yeah, Liam, put your money where your mouth is," rippled through the room. The guests, hungry for entertainment, had become a mob, and they were cheering for a fight. Liam was trapped. To back down now would be to lose face in front of everyone. His arrogance, poked and prodded, swelled to meet the challenge. He turned his smirk back on Amara, his eyes glittering with a new cruel idea. "Fine," he announced, his voice booming across the ballroom. He was performing now, playing to the crowd. "You want a show? You'll get a show." He pointed a finger at Amara. "Sing. Sing for everyone right now. And if you impress me, if you actually impress me, I'll double your salary for the entire week. A cash bonus, right here." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the offer sink in. Then he delivered the final, crushing blow. "But if you fail, if you bore us or you're just plain terrible, you get on that stage, and you apologize to all of my friends for wasting our time." The room fell silent again, the crowd's bloodlust momentarily sated by the sheer brutality of the wager. This was no longer just a challenge. It was a public execution wagered against a week's wages. Amara stood paralyzed between the two of them, Liam, the arrogant prosecutor, and Mrs. Ellis, the unexpected champion. But all she could feel was the weight of the new impossible choice he had laid at her feet. Her immediate instinct was to say no, to run. The thought of standing in front of this jeering, entitled crowd, of opening her mouth and letting them judge the most vulnerable part of herself, was terrifying. It was a violation. She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and took a half-step back, her eyes pleading with Mrs. Ellis to let it go. This was a fight she couldn't win. But Mrs. Ellis wasn't looking at her with pity. She was looking at her with expectation. She moved to Amara's side, her presence a small warm shield against the cold stares of the room. She leaned in, her voice a fierce, urgent whisper meant only for Amara's ears. "Listen to me, child," she said, her hand gently gripping Amara's arm. "Look at him. He thinks he's already won. He humiliated you 2 nights ago, and you walked away. If you walk away now, he wins twice. He proves to himself, and to everyone here, that he has the power to silence you. Is that the truth you want to live with?" The words struck Amara with the force of a physical blow. He wins twice. The phrase echoed in the deepest parts of her, stirring something that had been dormant for 3 years. It wasn't just about Liam anymore. It was about every person who had ever made her feel small, every condescending glance, every whispered insult. It was about the dream she had buried, the voice she had silenced herself. Her mother's words, a lifetime ago, came rushing back. "Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small for what you've been given." Amara took a deep, shuddering breath. The trembling in her hands hadn't stopped, but now it was fueled by something other than fear. It was adrenaline. It was anger. It was a spark of furious, desperate courage. She lifted her head, her gaze meeting Liam's across the room. She saw the smug certainty in his eyes, the confident smirk of a man who had never known a real fight in his life. And in that moment, something inside her broke free. "Okay," she said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the silence with the finality of a closing door. "I'll do it." A collective gasp went through the room. Liam's smirk widened. This was even better than he had hoped. He gestured grandly toward the stage. The band, which had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination, paused. The lead singer, a man with a kind, weary face, looked at the event host, who just gave a helpless shrug. The crowd was a single entity now, their attention laser-focused on the slim figure in the waitress uniform walking toward the stage. Amara moved as if in a dream, her feet feeling disconnected from her body. The short walk to the stage felt like miles. The host reluctantly held out a microphone. She took it, the metal cool and heavy in her palm. The lights of the ballroom seemed to dim, casting the tables into shadow, until the only thing that existed was her, standing alone in a single unforgiving pool of light. She looked out at the sea of faces, some mocking, some curious, some hungry for her failure. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a quiet storm was gathering. She gripped the microphone, her knuckles white, her eyes wide with a terror that was slowly, terrifyingly, turning into resolve. Of course. Here is the complete text of Act 4, written to follow your detailed outline. It continues the story with the established cinematic tone, focusing on the powerful emotional shift of Amara's performance. The stage lights were hot, pinning Amara in a halo of white that felt less like a spotlight and more like an interrogation lamp. Every sound in the ballroom had vanished, replaced by a thick, expectant silence that pressed in on her from all sides. She could feel the collective breath of the room being held, waiting for her to break. Her hand, slick with nervous sweat, trembled around the microphone. She looked out into the darkness and saw only silhouettes, but she could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, all focused on her. She saw Liam, standing near the front, his arms crossed, a smug, confident grin plastered on his face. He was a king in his court, waiting for the peasant to stumble. The sight of him, so certain of her failure, sent a tremor of pure, cold terror through her. She almost gave in. The impulse to drop the microphone, to turn and flee, was a physical force, a scream in her mind. But then, through the haze of faces, she saw Mrs. Ellis. The elderly woman was looking at her, not with pity, but with a gaze of unwavering belief. In that look, Amara saw her mother's eyes, felt her mother's hand on her shoulder, heard her mother's voice in her ear. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small for what you've been given. Amara took a breath. It was shallow, shaky, but it was a start. She closed her eyes, shutting out the crowd, shutting out Liam, shutting out everything but the melody that had been her mother's shield, and now had to become hers. The song was Walk With Me, a simple title for a universe of pain and hope. It was a song of quiet faith, a plea for strength when you have none left. She parted her lips, and the first note emerged. It was barely audible. A fragile, trembling sound, so quiet it was almost lost in the vastness of the ballroom. It was the sound of a whisper in a hurricane, a note so full of fear it threatened to break before it had even formed. A few guests near the front exchanged smirking glances. Liam's grin widened. This was it. The glorious, public collapse he had orchestrated. The first line was thin, reedy, the voice of a girl, not a woman. Walk with me when the path is dark. Hold my hand when I'm falling apart. The lyrics were a prayer, a confession of her own terror. She sang of shadows and doubt, of feeling unseen in a world of blinding light. Her voice was still small, but there was something in its texture, a raw, unvarnished honesty, that made a few people pause, their conversations trailing off. And then, something shifted. As she sang the second verse, a memory rose in her, unbidden and powerful. She saw her mother, standing in the church choir, her face illuminated by a shaft of light from a stained glass window, her voice soaring, not with perfection, but with a conviction that could move mountains. Amara channeled that memory, that strength. She took another breath, deeper this time, drawing power from a well of grief and love she had kept sealed for 3 years. Her voice found its center. The trembling faded, replaced by a resonant, soulful clarity that seemed to push back against the silence. The note wasn't just a sound. It had texture, it had weight. It was the sound of liquid gold. You see the scars, you know the fight. Sing your song into my night. The transformation was electric. A guest who had been raising a glass to his lips paused, his hand frozen mid-air. A woman who had been whispering to her companion slowly turned her head toward the stage, her eyes wide. The laughter, which had been simmering at the back of the room, died completely. The entire atmosphere of the ballroom began to change, the cynical, party-like energy dissolving under the sheer, unexpected beauty of the sound. The chandeliers, with their thousands of crystals, seemed to still, their light focused on the lone figure on the stage, as if they too were listening. Each lyric carried the ache of years spent unseen, the silent burden of her sister's future, the crushing weight of her abandoned dreams. But now, the ache was not a weakness, it was the source of her power. Her voice swelled, filling every corner of the vast room, no longer asking for strength but commanding it. It soared on the chorus, a wave of raw gospel-infused power that was both a lament and a declaration of war. It was the voice of every person who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told to learn their place. Liam's grin was gone. His face, just moments before a mask of arrogant amusement, had gone slack with disbelief. He stood frozen, his drink forgotten in his hand. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be the same woman, the trembling, insignificant waitress he had decided to make sport of. The voice washing over him was not small or broken. It was immense, a force of nature that stripped away his smug certainty, layer by layer. He saw his own reflection in the curved surface of a wine glass on the table in front of him, a distorted, hollowed-out version of himself, his confidence revealed as nothing more than a cheap, fragile veneer. He was undone, not by an argument or a confrontation, but by a sound, by a truth he didn't know existed. The woman he had tried to humiliate was now holding the entire room, including him, captive in the palm of her hand. He wasn't a king. He was just a silent, powerless witness to his own spectacular downfall. Amara's eyes were still closed, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She was in the heart of the song, her body swaying with a grace she didn't know she possessed. Her hands, no longer trembling, moved through the air, painting the story of her music. The final chorus was not a plea but a triumphant roar, a note of soaring, unshakable conviction that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hotel. She held the final note, sustaining it with a power that defied logic, letting it hang in the air, a shimmering, perfect thing, before allowing it to fade slowly, gracefully, back into silence. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a deafening, sacred void, more profound than any sound. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire room was suspended in a state of collective shock and awe. Then, a single person began to clap. It was Mrs. Ellis. She was on her feet, her hands clasped together, tears streaming down her face, her expression one of pure, unadulterated triumph. Her applause was the signal that broke the spell. The room erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a thunderous, explosive roar, a standing ovation that was less a polite gesture and more a cathartic release. Guests were on their feet, cheering, whistling, some crying openly without shame. The sound was a physical wave, washing over Amara on the stage. She opened her eyes, startled, as if waking from a dream. She saw the entire room standing, their faces turned toward her, their expressions transformed. She saw the bride, her makeup smudged with tears, who rushed past the tables, climbed the 2 steps onto the stage, and wrapped Amara in a fierce embrace. "You just made this wedding unforgettable," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. In the midst of the roaring crowd, a young man seated at a side table held up his phone. He had started recording out of a morbid desire to capture a train wreck. Now his thumb was still pressed firmly on the screen, his mouth slightly agape, capturing every second of the standing ovation, of the bride hugging the waitress, of the stunned, ashen face of Liam Ward. Unbeknownst to Amara, and to everyone else in that room, the clip that would shatter her old life and build a new one was already saved, its title forming in the mind of a stranger: Waitress silences Millionaire with one song. Of course. Here is the complete text for Act 5, continuing the story's trajectory. It is written to meet your outline's requirements, focusing on the consequences of the viral video for both Amara and Liam. Amara slept through the dawn, a deep, dreamless sleep of pure emotional and physical exhaustion. She had returned home from her shift just before 4 a.m., the thunderous applause of the ballroom still ringing in her ears, her body vibrating with a strange, terrifying energy. She had replayed the night's events in her mind. The jeers, the fear, the soaring, impossible moment when the song took over, until the images blurred into a surreal fever dream. She woke to the sound of her sister, Maya, shouting her name. "Amara! Amara, you have to wake up. You have to see this." Amara groaned, pulling a pillow over her head. "Maya, it's Saturday. Let me sleep." "No, you don't understand." Maya's voice was a high-pitched mix of disbelief and excitement. She shoved a phone into Amara's face, its screen glowing brightly in the dim morning light. "Look. Just look." On the screen was a video, already playing. The footage was a little shaky, filmed from a side angle, but the scene was unmistakable. It was the ballroom. It was her, standing on the stage in her maroon and white uniform. The title at the top of the screen read, "Waitress silences Millionaire with one song." Underneath it, the view count was ticking upwards with dizzying speed, 1.2 million views. Amara sat bolt upright in bed, her heart seizing in her chest. She watched, horrified and mesmerized, as the scene played out. She saw her own trembling hands, heard the fragile, terrified first notes of the song. She saw Liam Ward's smug, arrogant face, a perfect villain in a real-life drama. Then she heard the voice. Her voice. It poured out of the tiny phone speaker, filled with a power and a pain she had kept buried for years. The video ended with a roaring standing ovation, the bride's tearful embrace, and a final lingering shot of Liam's stunned, ashen face before the screen went black. "It's everywhere," Maya whispered, her eyes wide. "Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. People are sharing it like crazy." She scrolled down, revealing a waterfall of comments. "This gave me chills. Her voice is a gift. That rich guy got what he deserved. The look on his face is priceless. I cried when she started singing. You can hear her whole life in that song." Someone sign this woman right now. Amara felt a wave of vertigo, as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. The most private, painful, and triumphant moment of her life was no longer her own. It had been captured, titled, and uploaded for the entire world to consume, comment on, and share. She felt a surge of gratitude for the outpouring of support, but it was tangled with a deep, unsettling uneasiness. Her victory was inextricably bound to her humiliation. People weren't just cheering for her voice. They were cheering for the spectacle of a poor black waitress putting a rich white man in his place. She had become a symbol, a meme, a modern Cinderella story packaged for easy consumption. Her phone, sitting on her nightstand, buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Local news outlets, radio morning shows, bloggers, and a dozen self-proclaimed talent scouts were all trying to get a piece of the story. The ghost of the Riverside Royale was suddenly the most sought-after person in the city. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she could never walk back into that hotel. She could never again put on that uniform and pretend to be invisible. To go back would be to undo the stand she had taken, to let Liam Ward win the final round. Her dignity, the thing her mother had taught her to guard above all else, demanded more. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone, ignored the barrage of incoming calls, and found her supervisor's number. "Maria?" "It's Amara Johnson," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos churning inside her. "I'm calling to let you know I won't be coming in for my shift tonight. Or ever again. I quit." Across the city, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, Liam Ward woke up to a different kind of storm. His head was pounding from the scotch, and his phone was vibrating on the marble nightstand with such intensity that it sounded like an angry hornet. He picked it up, squinting at the screen, and saw a flood of notifications, hundreds of missed calls, thousands of social media tags, and a string of frantic text messages from his father, his friends, and most alarmingly, the head of his family's PR department. "Answer your phone. We have a 5-alarm fire." He opened his social media, and the world came crashing down. His feed was a dumpster fire of hatred. He was being called a racist, a bully, a pathetic excuse for a man. People had found his company's pages and were flooding them with 1-star reviews. News articles were already appearing, with headlines like "Heir to Ward Empire Humiliates Waitress in Viral Video." His carefully curated public image, the one his family had spent millions crafting, had been incinerated overnight. His PR team convened an emergency call. "You need to issue an apology now," said a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cynthia. "We've drafted a statement. It's concise, it's contrite, it hits all the right notes about learning and growing. We post it across all platforms, you go silent for a week, and we let this blow over." But Liam wasn't listening. He was watching the video again, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. He saw the scene not as a PR crisis, but as a moment of horrifying clarity. He saw his own sneering face, the casual cruelty in his eyes, the entitled posture of a man who believed he was untouchable. And he heard her voice. It cut through the haze of his hangover, through the wall of his arrogance, and struck something deep inside him. It was a sound of such profound truth and pain that it made his entire life, with its noise and parties and meaningless transactions, feel like a hollow sham. The public backlash was a problem, yes, but the guilt, a raw, unfamiliar, and deeply uncomfortable emotion, was worse. He knew the PR team's empty words would fix nothing. This wasn't something that could be managed or spun. This was something he had to face. He spent the next few hours using the resources at his disposal, making calls to contacts who owed his family favors. By late afternoon, he had what he was looking for, an address. A small, unassuming house in a working-class neighborhood, miles away from the glittering world of the Riverside Royale. When Amara answered the door, she thought it was another reporter. But it was him. Liam Ward, standing on her creaking porch swing, looking smaller and more lost than she could have imagined. He wasn't wearing a designer suit now, just simple jeans and a dark sweater. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of deep, unabashed shame. For a moment, they just stood there, the silence thick with the unspoken weight of the last 2 days. "What do you want?" Amara finally asked, her voice cold. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual bravado. "What I did, there's no excuse for it. It was cruel and arrogant and ugly. I'm sorry." Amara waited, expecting the apology to be followed by a justification, an excuse. But none came. He looked down at his hands, then met her gaze again. "My whole life has been about noise," he said, the words coming out slowly, as if he were discovering them himself. "Parties, deals, showing off. Just making the most noise so I feel like I'm important. But when you sang, it was the first time I'd heard something true in years." He shook his head, a look of genuine wonder on his face. "You sang the truth I've been running from. You built your life on dignity, and you silenced all my noise." The apology was so raw, so completely devoid of the self-serving spin she had expected, that it disarmed her. She saw not the monster from the ballroom, but a broken, hollow man, finally forced to look at his own reflection. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I accept your apology." A wave of relief washed over Liam's face. He saw an opening, a chance to fix this the only way he knew how. "Good," he said, reaching into his jacket. "I want to help. I'll pay for the best vocal coaches, studio time. I'll produce your first album myself. I can make you a star. Consider it a sponsorship. Whatever you need, it's yours." He was offering her a golden ticket, the dream she had been forced to abandon, served up on a silver platter. It was a tempting offer, a way to erase all her financial burdens in an instant. But she looked at him, at the checkbook he was starting to pull from his pocket, and she understood. This wasn't about her. It was about him. It was about using his money to erase his guilt, to turn his cruelty into a heartwarming story of redemption where he was still the hero, the wealthy benefactor who discovered the humble talent. She held up a hand, stopping him. Her voice was quiet, but it held a new, unshakable foundation of self-worth. "You don't fix cruelty with charity, Liam." He froze, his hand hovering over his jacket. "My voice is not for sale," she continued, the words coming from a place of absolute certainty. "Especially not to you. You can't buy your way out of what you did. You have to live with it." With that, she stepped back inside and gently closed the door, leaving him alone on her porch with his money and his guilt, the power dynamic between them finally, and irrevocably reversed. Of course. Here is the full text of Act 6, written to follow your detailed outline. It maintains the established tone while focusing on the quiet, meaningful paths of redemption and justice for Amara and Liam. Closing the door on Liam Ward was not an ending, but a beginning. The viral storm still raged online, but Amara found her anchor in the quiet determination that had settled in her soul. A few days later, a call came not from a slick music executive or a frantic TV producer, but from a familiar, gentle voice. It was Mrs. Vivian Ellis. They met for tea in Mrs. Ellis's sunlit living room, a space filled with books, sheet music, and the comforting scent of lemon polish. With her was a man in his late 30s with kind eyes and a thoughtful demeanor, who she introduced as her nephew, David. "David runs a small independent music label," Mrs. Ellis explained, her hands wrapped around a porcelain cup. "He doesn't care for the noise of the mainstream industry. He cares for stories." David leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Amara, what the world heard in that video wasn't just a voice, it was a testimony. It had a soul. That's what's missing from so much music today. I'm not going to promise you fame or fortune. I can't offer you what the big labels can. But I can promise you this: we will honor your story. We will protect your voice. We won't try to change you, package you, or turn you into something you're not. We just want to help you share your gift, on your own terms." He wasn't selling her a product. He was offering her a partnership. There was no talk of marketability, of crafting a public image, or of capitalizing on the drama with Liam Ward. His words were a balm on the raw, exposed nerve of her newfound fame. This was the path she had been looking for, a way to embrace the music without sacrificing the dignity she had fought so hard to reclaim. She signed with David's label the following week. Her new life did not begin with a stadium tour or a glamorous music video. It began in a small, soundproofed studio in a converted warehouse, with a handful of musicians who listened more than they played. It began with her telling her story, with David patiently helping her weave the threads of her life, her mother's faith, her sister's dreams, her own quiet resilience, into lyrics that were as honest and raw as the voice that sang them. Her first performances were not in opulent ballrooms, but in intimate, community-focused venues. She sang in a historic church in her old neighborhood, the notes soaring to the rafters, just as her mother's once had. She sang at a fundraising event for a local art school, her voice wrapping the audience in a shared sense of hope. She sang in a small, packed jazz club, where people came not to be seen, but to listen. At these events, she wasn't a viral sensation or a Cinderella story. She was just Amara, a woman with a story to tell. After each performance, she would talk to the people who came to see her, listening to their own stories of being underestimated, of finding strength in unexpected places. She realized her song was no longer just her own, it belonged to them too. With the first check she received from her music, she didn't buy a new car or a fancy apartment. She established a small foundation in her mother's name, the Sarah Johnson Songbird Scholarship, to fund music lessons for underprivileged children in the city. It was her quiet act of justice, a way to ensure that other voices, silenced by circumstance, might one day have the chance to be heard. She was not just building a career, she was building a legacy of grace. Meanwhile, the public backlash against Liam Ward had been swift and brutal. His name became a hashtag for arrogance and entitlement. Deals were quietly cancelled. Invitations to social events dried up. His father, a man who viewed the world as a balance sheet, saw his son as a liability, a stain on the family brand. But for Liam, the public shaming was secondary to a deeper, more profound crisis. Amara's final words to him on her porch, "You have to live with it," had become his prison. He was haunted by the memory of his own cruelty, by the hollowness her voice had exposed in him. The noise of his life, which he had once mistaken for importance, now sounded like empty static. He stepped away from his role at his father's company, retreating from the world that had once been his playground. For weeks, he did nothing but exist in the sterile silence of his penthouse. But Amara's voice, and the courage behind it, had planted a seed. He began to think about the world outside his windows, the city he had only ever seen as a collection of properties to be bought and sold. He thought about the thousands of children growing up in neighborhoods he had only ever driven through, children who might have a gift like Amara's but would never have the chance to discover it. His redemption, when it came, was as quiet and understated as Amara's justice. There was no press conference, no grand, public gesture of apology. He started a foundation of his own, funded with a significant portion of his personal inheritance. Its mission was simple: to build and support state-of-the-art music and arts programs in the city's most underfunded inner-city schools. He was anonymous in his work, channeling the funds through community leaders, his name appearing on no plaques or buildings. He found a new purpose not in being seen, but in providing the resources for others to be seen and heard. It was a quiet, solitary act of penance, a way of building something meaningful out of the wreckage of his own arrogance. Months passed. The autumn chill gave way to the deep cold of winter, and then thawed into the tentative warmth of spring. Amara's first album, titled The Sarah Sessions, was released to critical acclaim, celebrated for its authenticity and emotional depth. One evening, she found herself back in the world of gowns and champagne, but this time, she was not an employee. She was an invited guest and performer at a major charity gala for citywide arts education. As she stood speaking with Mrs. Ellis and David near the silent auction tables, she saw him across the room. Liam was standing alone by a window, looking out at the city lights. He was thinner, and the arrogant swagger in his posture was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness. He wasn't working the room or demanding attention. He was just there. For a moment, their eyes met, and he gave a small, respectful nod before turning his gaze back to the window. Later that evening, after her performance was met with a heartfelt standing ovation, he approached her as she was leaving the stage. He waited patiently until a small group of well-wishers had dispersed, then stepped forward. "Amara," he said, his voice quiet. "Liam," she replied, her tone neutral, devoid of the anger that had once fueled her. He didn't offer excuses or try to fill the space with nervous chatter. He just looked at her, his expression one of sincere, unburdened gratitude. "You don't know it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but you changed me. That night, you changed everything." Amara held his gaze, seeing the truth of his words in the newfound humility in his eyes. The anger was gone, the bitterness had faded, and all that was left was a quiet sense of peace, of a circle finally being closed. A small, gentle smile touched her lips. "Then maybe the song worked," she said. He nodded, a flicker of a smile appearing on his own face, and without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Amara watched him go, a sense of poignant closure settling over her, before she turned to rejoin her friends, walking back into the light of her own life. Of course. Here is the final act of the story, written to match your detailed outline and bring the narrative to a poignant and satisfying conclusion. 1 year later, the stage was infinitely larger, but the light felt the same. It was the opening night of Amara's first solo tour, held at the city's historic Grand Regent Theatre. Every velvet-covered seat was filled, from the orchestra pit to the highest balcony. The air, once thick with the scent of expensive perfume and condescension, was now electric with anticipation and genuine affection. This was not a crowd of disconnected elites. It was a vibrant tapestry of the city: students, teachers, families, people who had seen their own struggles and hopes reflected in her story. The entire concert was being broadcast live, a testament to the quiet, authentic movement she had built, note by note, story by story. Backstage, Amara stood in the wings, the roar of the crowd a distant ocean. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore, but a simple, elegant gown the color of midnight. Maya was there, her eyes shining with pride, along with Mrs. Ellis and David, her small, loyal circle of believers. Maya squeezed her hand. "They're waiting for you." Amara nodded, a slow, calm smile spreading across her face. The fear that had once been a constant companion was gone, replaced by a deep, settled sense of purpose. She walked out onto the stage, and the theater erupted. The applause was not the polite, obligatory sound of a gala. It was a wave of pure, heartfelt joy. She sang for nearly 2 hours, her voice stronger and richer than ever before. She shared the stories behind her songs, her presence on stage marked by a humble, captivating grace. For her final number, she stepped forward, the rest of the band receding into shadow. "This last song. This one is a little different," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying to every corner of the theater. "Some of you might have heard it before. It was born in a moment of fear, in a room where I was told I didn't belong. For a long time, it was a painful memory. But tonight, I'm taking it back. It's a song about finding your own light when you're standing in someone else's shadow. It's called Center Stage." As the first gentle piano notes of the melody began, the massive screen behind her, which had been dark until now, flickered to life. Projected in stark, silent black and white were clips from that fateful night at the hotel. The footage was raw, unedited, and achingly familiar. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as the story replayed itself in giant, haunting images. There was Liam Ward's arrogant, sneering face as he issued his challenge. There was Amara herself, her expression a mask of pure terror, her hand trembling as she took the microphone. As Amara sang the first verse, her live voice weaving a powerful counterpoint to the silent images of her past, the montage continued. The camera zoomed in on Mrs. Ellis's face, her expression a mixture of righteous anger and fierce hope. It captured the anonymous faces in the crowd, their smirks slowly dissolving into stunned disbelief. Then came the turning point. As Amara's voice on stage began to swell, building towards the soaring chorus, the image behind her showed the moment her own fear had turned into resolve. The silent, trembling girl on the screen was replaced by a woman claiming her power. The montage culminated in a final stunning juxtaposition, a close-up of Liam Ward's shocked, hollowed-out expression, followed by the image of the entire ballroom rising to its feet in a thunderous ovation. The live audience was utterly silent, captivated by the collision of past and present. They were not just hearing a song, they were witnessing a resurrection. Amara's voice filled the theater, no longer the sound of a woman fighting to be heard, but the sound of a woman who knew with every fiber of her being that she deserved to be there. When she held the final triumphant note, the projected images faded to black, leaving her standing alone in a single powerful beam of light. For a moment, there was a profound, reverent silence. Then the applause came, a tidal wave of emotion that shook the very foundations of the old theater. Amara let the sound wash over her, a gentle smile on her face. She held up a hand, not to quiet them, but to connect with them. "Thank you," she said when the applause finally softened. "I want to dedicate that performance, and my entire career, to every single person who has ever been told they don't belong. To everyone who has been made to feel small, invisible, or unworthy." She looked out, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the highest balconies, trying to see every one of them. "They tell you to wait for your turn. They tell you to know your place. But I'm here to tell you that sometimes, the stage isn't given to you. Sometimes, you have to sing your way onto it." In the 20th row, sitting not in a VIP box but in a regular seat among the crowd, Liam Ward watched, his face streaked with silent tears. He didn't try to wipe them away. He applauded with the rest of them, his hands clapping not for the celebrity on the stage, but for the woman whose courage had shown him the profound bankruptcy of his own soul, and in doing so, had given him a chance to build a new one. He was not a part of her story anymore, but he felt a deep, humbling gratitude to have been a witness to it. The concert was over. The crowd was on its feet, the theater echoing with a single chanted word, Amare. Amare. But it wasn't the chant of adoring fans for a distant star. It was the sound of a community celebrating one of their own. It was a chant for her journey, for her resilience. They were chanting not for the voice alone, but for her courage to stand tall when the world had told her to kneel. Amara bowed deeply, a gesture of pure, heartfelt thanks. Then, as the roar of the crowd swelled, she turned and walked away from the light, disappearing into the quiet shadows of the wings. She was not walking toward the blinding flash of cameras or the clamor of fame, but toward the simple, profound grace of a life she had built on her own terms, a legacy measured not in applause, but in the enduring truth of her own voice.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.